Hello, welcome back to IA Command. This is TV Boy, and this is our follow-up video to the uh, tier rankings for the Imperial Assault campaign heroes. This time we are looking at the Imperial Assault Imperial Class Decks, kind of the counterparts to the heroes in the campaign. And wow, oh boy, did that video get a ton of views and a ton of comments, way more than my normal videos. So clearly, there's an audience out there that is hungry for more of these campaign videos, so happy to do these every once in a while. So, something I should mention before we get started here that I did not do in my heroes rankings video, tier video, is talking about what do the tiers mean. So, let's kind of just go over that quickly. So, we have 5 tiers here. S, A, B, C, and D. Of course, there's no F tier because everything is fun in the game. There's nothing that's really unplayable. That would be F. So S tier, this is the best of the best. For heroes, it means oftentimes that hero is doing the value of 2 heroes or more in a campaign. In terms of the Imperial class decks, what that means for S tier is basically that if you play this class deck, your opposing hero team is going to be have a really hard time beating you, so long as you aren't picking like the worst deployments and the worst class cards. If you're not going easy on them, they're gonna be really hard pressed to win. They're gonna have to have some really broken heroes and or combos and really tight play to beat a class deck that has an S tier. For A tier, it's still really good. It often means if you have like the good cards from that class deck, and if you pair them with the right deployments, you're very likely to win any given mission. Your opposing rebel team is gonna have to have some solid heroes, good strategy, and good teamwork if they want to beat an A tier class deck. B tier class deck. B tier is fine. It can do work. It has the tools, some good cards in it. Maybe not all the cards or even most of the cards are very good. And a decent band of heroes playing decently well could probably beat you in any given mission. But you have the tools available in a B tier class deck to win missions. C tier class deck is like it's okay. There's maybe 1 or 2 standout cards in the deck, but the rest are maybe below par, and you're gonna struggle as the Imperial player. Maybe you're not going to be able to rely on your class deck. You're going to have to rely a lot more on your agenda cards and good, tight, almost skirmish-like play with your very much more efficient deployment cards if you're going to want to win missions. And you're really going to struggle if you're playing against like a top-tier team of heroes that are playing really well. So that's C tier, and then D tier. D tier, you're going to struggle regardless of which cards you pick from a D tier deck. You're really playing at a handicap if you play D, and probably not really having a ton of fun because a D tier class deck just doesn't really work well. It can do things, it can do some things, maybe, but a D tier class deck is really going to struggle through the campaign. And you're going to be hard pressed to pull out wins, even if you've got really good deployments and agendas and positioning. You'd have to have all of that and have a pretty weak team of rebels facing against you if you're going to get wins consistently with a D tier class deck. All right, so let's get into it. I'm going to go through these by the order of their release. This is not scripted, so I'm just going to be kind of going through based on my thoughts on these class decks. I don't know why it changed the colors here. I definitely do not like red for S tier. This is what I would do. And yes, we are live. That is the nature of doing these live. Single take, that's my motto. Okay, there we go. Prettier too, right? Okay, going through by order of release. Let's start off with Military Might. And by the way, we're using cards.boardwars.eu for this one, for the pictures. I really like their website. And we can look at all the cards at once here. Also, check out the description in the video. You can go to the uh, template I used for this. I made this template in tiermaker.com, and you can make your own tier list with these Imperial class decks, and maybe we can all compare. And definitely leave your comments below. Tell me what you think of my tier list. What maybe if you have a difference of opinion, I'd love to hear it. Of course, these are all subjective. This is my opinion based on my experiences in the campaign. You may have far different experiences, and that's what makes the game really fun. Is that it's different for each player, and we all get to share and discuss our different experiences. All right, uh, uh, so military might. I think this is a really strong deck to start on. I think this is a fantastic class deck. I actually think this is one of the better class decks you can play if it's your first time playing as an Imperial player. It's just a solid deck. It's really good at what it does, which is dealing damage to the rebels while also making your trooper figures more efficient. So looking at the cards we have here, the starting card's really good. Show of Force. It basically gives you a free focus on any one of your attacks each round. And then the quality varies actually. So that's the only. I think that would be the only problem I have with this class deck is that you could pick some bad ones if you pick the wrong cards, but the good cards are really good. So like Combat Medic and Riot Grenades, these cards are whatever. If you have an extra 1 XP left over at the end of the campaign, this is where you would spend those. However, we've got some good ones here in the the higher cost cards. So Assault Armor is really great. +2 health attachment for any figure group. So this is fantastic. You put this on your stormtroopers for an extra +6 health total. Really good on the elite stormtroopers to get them up to 7 health. Makes them a lot harder to deal with. And then you also get to reroll a black die for an exhaust, so it's really good. Endless ranks is a little bit tricky if you don't know how it works. It doesn't reduce your reinforcement cost of your individual troopers in a group, only the total cost. So, like a regular stormtrooper group would be reduced to 5, but it doesn't reduce the reinforcement from 2 to 1. So this one was okay, but it actually got a lot better with Tyrants of Lothal with the Death Troopers because those are deployed individually, but they kind of work like a full unit of figures. So you could, for example, you could bring a unit of Death Troopers, which is 2 regulars, the 3.1s, and Elite, the 4.1, and then you could deploy the 2 regulars, which would normally cost 6, but with Endless Ranks, that gets reduced down to 4. So that's really good. So if you have access to Death Troopers, Endless Ranks is great. Shock Troopers is great. Really nice force multiplier here. You want certain units. I think certain troopers benefit more. Riot Troopers are fantastic with this because, of course, they're always attacking at close range and they have lots of surge abilities, and their red-blue dice don't roll a ton of surges. So, Riot Troopers are really good. Heavy Troopers are pretty good with this. Death Troopers again are quite good with this because they have a lot of they have more than average surge abilities. Stormtroopers not so great because they only have 1 surge that you can convert into damage, but yeah, so that one's good. Same with Jet Troopers, not so great with the Shock Troopers, but the other troopers are really good. Then you have Sustained Fire, which is fantastic. Basically gives you a free attack, even though you take a stun. It doesn't. Who cares? You're getting a free attack from one of your any figure, so you could use this with a really big figure, especially if it's about to die. Combat Veteran's really good for troopers only, but you get +1 block to the defense results, which is great, and +1 damage. So if you combine Combat Veterans with Shock Troopers on something like Riots or like even Elite Stormtroopers, you can do a ton of extra damage, spike damage. And then Shock and Awe, not so good. I would avoid that one and just go with Combat Veterans. So yeah, there's a lot. The cards in this deck are hit or miss, but the hits hit hard, and I think this is a fantastic deck. I'm gonna put this one in A tier. Okay, so moving on. Next one, we're gonna talk about the infamous Subversive Tactics deck. So this deck is heavily focused on Strain, which is sort of like resource denial because the Imperial heroes rely very heavily on their endurance and strain tokens to use their abilities. This deck can be hit or miss. It can also be very unfun to play against for the rebels. So I would advise staying away from this if you're playing against like a team of new rebel players that haven't got a handle, because they you really, as rebels playing against this, you really need to manage your strain very carefully, which is a lot harder when you're brand new and you're still learning all the rules and stuff. So, this deck is good. I think, honestly, though, I think this deck is a little overrated by the community. I think this deck gets more of a reputation for being strong than it deserves, where it's more of a, like, it's really good for stomping on new players, and it's really good against certain heroes. But if you come up against like a team of experienced heroes, or if you are against certain team comps that don't rely super heavily on strain, like there's a lot of heroes now from the expansions that can do a lot of stuff without taking a ton of strain to do so, this deck gets a lot weaker in my opinion. But let's look at it. Oops. So let's look at the deck. So the starting card is okay, definitely not as good as like Military Might, especially since you're giving the rebels a choice. So I mean, and you have to do it before the dice are rolled. So I think most of the time the rebels will the rebel you use this on will either just decide that it's not worth it to take the strain and give you the evade cancel, or if they really want to kill the figure they're attacking, they'll just take the strain. And they can take this strain over their maximum endurance too, so it's not ever like you can force the choice on them. But it's fine. It adds it again. Everything kind of compounds with this deck. Surgical strike is fine. Pretty good actually. It's pretty close to being equivalent to a focus, especially since it gets through dodges, so that's really nice. You don't need to make range. So actually, surgical strike's pretty good. Savage weaponry. Actually, this rune's really good too, especially if you put it on a group that can get lots of extra attacks. So like sentry droids or hired guns, really good with savage weaponry. Let's see, exploit weakness. This one's okay. It does give you a free attack. So actually, this one's pretty good too. Actually, it's funny. I think a lot of the cards in here are good. So that's one thing to say about this deck is it looks like it's pretty hard to build a bad skill tree build or whatever you call it. You can't really find too many bad cards in here. You can convert damage to strain. Again, piling on the strain. I do not like. So I'm going to say this. I don't like cards that have strain threat cost to use them, because threat is so important for putting figures on the table for as the Imperial player, and it can really mess you up when like I plan all of my when I play as an Imperial player, I'm planning the entire mission. Each turn is planned out with how I'm going to use my threat to the maximum potential. And whenever you have abilities that cost threat to use, you often don't know if you're going to be able to use them or not. So it's really hard to plan around that. And then that can leave you with using your threat inefficiently, which I think is really bad for Imperial players. So that's why I don't like these cards that have this threat cost. But this one's pretty good, I guess. You can spend one threat to apply +3 damage, although it's an exhaust. So that's pretty strong. I guess if you're going to spend threat, that's a good way to spend it. Let's see, at the end of each round. Yeah, weary target. This one's good. Basically, 2 strain to. Oh no, it's only one hero. So 2 strain for 3 XP. This one's not doesn't seem that good. Oppression. It's been a while, guys, since I played with this class deck or played against it, so I have to read these to review and get caught up. Um, Oppression, it's okay. It gives you +1 evade effectively on all your defenses. Okay for 4 XP. I'd rather have, if I'm going to pay 4 XP, I'd rather have it give me an offense boost so I can work on getting the heroes wounded, which no quarter does do. Yeah, that's okay. +1 surge. It's only good against certain units. It's not going to be good for all units. I'd rather have Pierce 1 or +1 damage. So neither of these 4 XP cards excite me, but everything else is pretty good in this deck. I think it's good. I think if you're playing against certain heroes, or if you're playing against a really good rebel team that can manage their threat really well, you're going to have a hard time. But if you pick this deck, especially against new players, they're going to have a hard time managing the strain. All in all, I think I will give this an A. I don't think it's as strong as Military Might, honestly. Even maybe at its best, like if they have all four heroes are like strain batteries like Diala, Gideon, Garkon, Jin, Odon, like if you're playing against all heroes that just suck up strain like crazy, then this is going to be maybe better than military might. But I think average case scenario, military might's going to be better, and it's going to be better at winning you the game by wounding the heroes or forcing them to rest more. All right, moving on. Oops. So the final class deck in the core box, technological superiority. So this class deck's all about attachments, augmenting your figures with attachments. It's also about droids and troopers. So let's take a look here. Experimental arms, it's an attachment. While attacking, we apply +1 surge. Then, after draw, you suffer 1 damage. I actually like this card a lot. I didn't like it at first when I first started, but I have come to appreciate any card that doesn't exhaust, that adds symbols to my attacks multiple times. Even if it's an attachment, because there are figures that you can attach it to that will get a lot of benefit from it. Specifically, I think about stuff like hired guns. The 4-point hired guns, they're very meager attacks when you first look at them, but if the rebels ignore them for even one turn and let them activate, they just hop and pounce on the rebels and then stick to them so that they keep dealing damage, and then if the rebels finally kill them, they take more damage from their parting shot. And cards like experimental arms are really good with hired guns, because they have multiple ways to spend surges. And they don't care about suffering the damage. In fact, it can actually help them because it can get you an extra attack once you do this 3 times. So I like experimental arms quite a bit. You just have to use it with specific figures. Jetpacks, mobile on your troopers, meh, that's okay. I mean, it's good for on certain. It'll be good on certain maps where it allows you to like pop your troopers in and out of cover and make it really hard for the rebels to get good attacks on them without spending actions to move to get past cover. But then on other maps, it's just going to be pretty useless. So I don't know if I would prioritize this. Technological superiority gives you +1 speed to your droids. So that's good because the regular probe droid only has 3 speed. So this is actually pretty decent if you, especially if you're playing in a campaign where you get a lot of regular probe droids for free. And then it can actually focus. They can actually focus each other, which is also quite good. So actually, this is pretty technical support's quite good if you play it correctly, if you have the right starting groups and open groups. Failsafe, I don't like this. I don't like this. Pretty much anything where I have to spend threat, I do not like. So the 2 XPs are both bad. Arc Blasters, it's an attachment. You get an extra surge ability for +1 and blast one, which is great. Oh, and you can stun. So Arc Blasters is fantastic. Even if they pass, the making them test is good because it gets rid of their focuses if they have it. Adding 1 white die, that's fine. It's okay for 3. Um, Superior augments. Oh, this is good. Another one. So hired guns with this and experimental arms. Fantastic. Chef's kiss. Really good. +1 damage, +1 surge on all your attacks. That's how you win. That's how you win games. By the way, is just those kind of force multipliers. I have found have been one of the most effective tactics with these Imperial class decks. And then adaptive weaponry. You can replace 1 die. This is nice. It's good for any for what do you call it? For any attack. It's on attachment, so that's really good. You can replace basically any die with a. You would probably replace it with a red die, but maybe you'll replace like a yellow die with a green die or something. So that's pretty good. So all in all, I actually like technological superiority. Um, I think it requires more building around it than something like military might, where you can just like a lot of the cards are more agnostic or like aren't super specific to what type of figures you have to use. Whereas, because like troopers, you have so many options, but there's not that many options for droids, especially if you haven't gotten the expansions for stuff like sentry droids, or HKs, which this is fine on HKs. This is the technical support is actually quite good with HKs because of priority target. I would give this one. It's hard. I would say bottom of A or top of B. I think the fact that you have to know the tricks of how to use this deck that makes it a little harder to use. I'm going to put it at the top of B. So this is high B tier for me. So those are our core set class decks. Now let's jump into our expansions. So first one being Twin Shadows that came out after the core set, and Inspiring Leadership. So this deck's okay. I think there was a major drop off in power level from the core set to Twin Shadows, and that included the Imperial Class Deck. It's based around Imperial leaders, specifically Imperial officers, and then giving a lot of your figures like Imperial officer like abilities. The problem is with in Empire, because you can't attack twice with Imperial figures most of the time, you don't really need a lot of extra movement. It can be helpful sometimes, but it's not super great. So, like Field Officer, I think this is not particularly good, giving an order. It does give you the full move, unlike in Skirmish. I guess officers have their full order in campaign as well, but Supervisor Agent's pretty good. It gives you a free officer, which is nice for getting activations and for certain things like holding objectives if that's part of the mission or blocking or whatever. I think there's really one card in here that's good. Um, this is funny, but it's so like it's just kind of cute in campaign, whereas in skirmish it's a lot more powerful, where you can really build your deck around it and control how it works. Noble Sacrifice. This looks really good. You'd think that like you could get up to 5 focuses on your figures, but it's actually really hard to trigger because all of these figures have to have line of sight to the figure when it dies, and this is a deplete. So you only get it once per mission. Um, Field General's pretty good. It turns any leader or trooper into an elite officer with executive order. So that's nice to get extra attacks. That does give you an opportunity to get a bonus attack you wouldn't otherwise get. This one's actually pretty good. Um, it like forces the opponent's attacks to go into figures they don't want to attack. So actually, I would say that this is one of the okay cards that cost threat. I still don't like using those cards though. Let's see. Lead by example is okay. And then this is the card, Optimal Tactics. So while attacking Imperial figure within 3 spaces of friendly leader, apply +1 damage, and it may reroll 1 attack die. So as long as you have like multiple leaders in your open groups or in your figure on the board, you should be able to get +1 damage and a reroll on all of your attacks, which is great. And that's what I would expect from a 4 XP card. So if you can combine this again with lots of cheap attackers, hired guns, regular stormtroopers, regular sentry droids, or the elites of any of those, this is really good, and I think you can get some wins with this. So because of that, I am going to put. Oops. Sorry, guys. 1 second. Not sure what happened there. There we go. Okay, so because of that, yeah, I'm going to put this in C. C tier I think makes sense for inspiring leadership. Okay, moving on to Return to Hoth. So this one had 2 new Imperial Class decks. So the first one we're going to talk about is Armored Onslaught. And I actually think this one I actually think this deck is slightly overrated, to be honest. I think a lot of people really like this deck, but it never really felt as strong as the other core set decks, in my opinion. But let's take a look at it. The free card you get lets you replace 1 die with a red die, and then also gives you Blast 1. So that's fine. It's not quite as good as a free focus, and sometimes actually the blast one can mess you up when like the rebels move up next to one of your figures that's already activated. A lot of the times, actually, I find the blast one is a detriment than compared to being like a boon, because it's just more often you're going to have your Imperial figures next to a Rebel figure than having the Rebel figures next to each other, unless it's like the beginning of round one. So that's when it helps, and then the rest of the mission, it usually is not great. Armor Core, this one's okay. Gives you a reroll on a conditional. I don't really like cards that are either that are both conditional and semi-random. If rerolls are not a guarantee, and you're not guaranteed to be able to trigger this. Automated repairs. This one's fine. Special action to recover one is not super great. Surge to recover two is good. I would not prioritize this though. There's other cards you would take before that. So again, this is a deck where these 1 XP cards are cards you're going to pick up at the end of the campaign where you only have 1 XP left, and you're not going to be getting any more for the rest of the campaign. Explosive Entry, this card is bad because you cannot choose where your figures are deployed, and it's random, so you have a 1 in 6 of doing no damage, even if you are able to catch a Rebel figure off of your deployment. Heavy Firepower, this card is good. Effectively lets you automatically get the +3 damage result on a red die. It's not like it's usually worth +1 or +2 damage in reality. Like a lot of times, like it's not actually straight up +3 because you're giving up a die, but you get the guaranteed results. So that's fine. This card's actually really good. Mortar basically gives you Grenadier ability on any of your figures. So that is good because it lets you, because you actually get to, they don't have to be adjacent to each other. You can choose a space that's like between multiple Rebel figures and deal some extra damage that way. Also, any card that lets you like convert one of your second action from only being able to do like a move into actually being able to do damage, that is always good, and I'm always looking for that when I look at these class cards. Next is Reactive Armor. Droid or vehicle only attachment. Gives you +2 health. That's okay. It's better on droids for sure, specifically multi-group droids, so like sentry droids or HKs, because then you get more health out of the card. And if you are defending... Oh, so if you roll the evade, you get an extra +2 block. So this is, yeah, this card's fine. Makes the black die a lot more reliable. I think that's a lot of what this deck is doing, is just giving you more reliability and reducing variance, which is good. But I think getting spikes of power is better than just like reducing your variance, reducing the floor on your variance. Especially as the Imperial player, because you have so many other ways to control the missions, because you have all the information and the Rebels don't. So usually I like to have a little variance on my side compared to, because I have other ways of controlling variance at my control. Anyway, going back, so the 4 XPs, sadly, they do cost threat. I guess power to shields technically doesn't. It's just you get extra uses out of it. But it's not that good. You basically get to choose one of these keywords once. Pierce, blast, cleave, or a condition, and then you nullify it. It's okay, and it's only while defending. So if it's something that a rebel can do to you that is a condition, like if they can stun you without attacking you, you can't use this. And then rapid dominance is just bad. It gives you an additional action, but it doesn't give you assault. So unless you have assault already, which I'll remind you, ATST does not have assault. General Weiss does not have an assault. Most heavies don't have assault. This is only good for the E-Web to get an extra attack, and 2 threat is absolutely not worth an extra attack, in my opinion. And then you have to deplete it and spend 3 threat if you want to use that second ability. No. So that's bad. So yeah, I find it's the deck is fine. It has a high floor, but unfortunately, I think the problem with it is it has a low ceiling. It just can't do as much spiking as the original, as the other cards. So I will put this in B tier, right under that one. Alright, so the next class deck we have is Precision Training. So this one is actually kind of themed the same way. It's supposed to reduce variance. But I actually think this deck is actually underrated by a lot of people in the community, although it's understandable why, and we'll take a look here and see why. I think a lot of people underrate this deck because the value you get from this deck does not come until a little bit later in your campaign. So starting off, we've got Strike Force, which is an attachment, and it just gives all of the figures in the group a reroll on their attacks. So yeah, pretty underwhelming, especially since your kind of base units are your probe droids and your stormtroopers, which both already get a reroll by default. So you kind of have to find some more exotic units that you can put this on, where the reroll is really going to help out. Heavy troopers like this a lot though, so I think that's a good one you can put it on. Um, yeah, I can't really think of anything else right off the top of my head. Maybe I guess Tuskens, but they're habitat restricted. Actually, Nexus really like this to reroll that red. So there you go. All right, sharpshooters again, not great. +1 accuracy, pinpoint accuracy. This one actually is pretty good. You only get to use it once, but that's usually that's the most you'll ever need it. And you get to do it after the dice are rolled, which is nice. Yeah, and I should also mention knowledge of the attack or knowledge of attack is actually pretty good because you can use it after dice are rolled. You know, you can use it when you see that there's only one surge in the dice pool on the attacker, and like that's a surge that's going to give them +2 damage or something. That can actually be really good and can actually save a figure from death a lot of times, and keep that figure alive and force the rebels to put another attack into that figure to kill it, or give that figure a chance to attack that it otherwise wouldn't have. So, knowledge of attack's pretty good. Assassins is okay. Not a lot of body blocking going on the rebel side. I should mention single-minded too. Actually, pretty good. I didn't play with it when I used it in the campaigns that I played this deck in, but I kind of wish I did. I think I underestimated how powerful this ability can be until I got to play with Ezra. But yeah, this is pretty strong. And then it does have a threat cost, but it's just to reuse the card, which is kind of a nice bonus. It's kind of the best of both worlds, where you don't have to spend threat to get a benefit from the card, but if you have extra threat for whatever reason, you can use it on this card. The only problem with it is it only triggers when you reroll, which is a bit narrow, but obviously this deck gives you lots of opportunities to do that, and as we mentioned before, there's lots of opportunities in just the core set units to reroll. Excuse me. So I think overall, this is a deck that has like just a couple of really strong cards, but they're really strong. Find the weakness is like when you combine this with just a bunch of 2-point figures, flooding the board, or with figures that can get multiple attacks each round, it gets so overwhelming for the rebels. In my experience, it just death by 1,000 cuts is really the way it operates, and it's a very strong strategy. And then single-minded would be really good, as well as knowledge of attack. So I think if you were actually going to build, if I was going to do 10 experience points, it would actually just be the 2/4 XP cards, and then knowledge of attack plus the base one, and then maybe get pinpoint accuracy if you have 11. So for this deck, I think I will give. I do think it's underrated, but I don't think it's severely underrated. So I'm actually going to put it at the bottom of B tier. I think that's right. So it is. I think it is. Uh, hmm. That's interesting. So I actually think this is. I think this generally has better cards, but when you actually get to the final stage where you're using Find the Weakness, I think you're actually going to be a lot stronger and better off than if you had played the best cards in this deck. So I'm actually going to put it just above the other one, the other one in this expansion. Probably controversial. I'm sure I'm going to hear a lot about this in the comments, so let me know what you think. All right, moving on to the Bespin Gambit expansion. There was one new deck in here, Class Deck. This was all based around hidden and the hidden condition and accuracy. So looking at the cards in this one, and again, I'm just reading through them because I do want to refresh my memory and make sure I don't miss anything. So this one gives you a free hidden on one of your Imperial figures at the start of an activation. So that's always interesting. You can do it when the hero starts. It's not great to do it that way, I think, because they'll just attack something else, or they'll attack your hidden figure if killing that is important. So I think usually you use it at the start of one of your Imperial figure activations to make sure it gets that +1 surge. So +1 surge on an attack is fine. Honestly, the accuracy bonus doesn't really come up that much in campaign compared to skirmish, where you have to fire from farther away because of the deployment zones. Okay, then we have stealth. So stealth is kind of broken because it makes melee attacks require accuracy, and then it gives you another hidden condition. This is really hard on melee figures, so if you I forget who picks decks first. I think the Imperial player picks their deck first, but that's kind of sucks if you do and then the rebels know that they're not supposed to take a melee figure against this deck. It's just really hard. It's really easy to make melee figures miss their attacks when you have this attachment on something. So yeah, I mean it is an attachment, so it's not like they have to attack that group. But if you have just like one really strong group that you deploy as your only group for the round, then they might not really have a choice. I haven't had this issue come up when I played this. I've only played against this deck once, and I think we just avoided it. But I've heard a lot of people complain that this is really broken against melee. Shadow cores lets your hidden figures hide other figures, which is kind of funny. Um, Pretty strong actually. I think you can snowball really well, especially if you have another card that's giving you another hidden. You have two hidden figures, and then that becomes four hidden figures, and then that becomes six, etc. Onward and onward. It doesn't multiply exponentially, of course, because you're not saving up your hiddens. You're going to use them on your attacks, but it's pretty good. Shadow armor. So this is the one I think that you combine with stealth to apply -2 accuracy, and if they're also hidden, it's like, yeah, no way you're hitting with a melee attack. The problem with this one is it's on declare, so you don't get to see the dice results first. I think that's also a big problem with just hidden in general. It's like accuracy is such a binary mechanic. It's either, it's literally hit or miss. So either hidden will do nothing or it will make the attack entirely miss. More often than not, it does nothing defensively. Um, but -1 damage or -1 surge is pretty decent. I think I would always go for the -1 damage, which makes this not great because you can't predict which symbols on the attack dice are going to be the most important until after you see them get rolled. Let's see. This one's pretty good. It's surprise attack. It's kind of like element of surprise from skirmish. +1 damage, but it's an exhaust, so it's kind of limited on how much it can do. I don't think +1 damage is great for 2 XP. I think it's okay, but really you want cards that are going to give you +1 damage on multiple attacks that are, again, force multipliers is what I like to call them. Execution Squad, you can trigger the same surge ability up to twice per attack. This is actually pretty good, especially if you put it on like a group of elite stormtroopers. They'll really love this card, especially if they're hidden, so you can get surge for +2 damage twice. They do tend to over surge. And then on something like ISB infiltrators, that if you hiding them, very good. So this, I actually like this pretty well. Redeployment. This is cool. You get to spend surge instead of threat to deploy or reinforce. This is actually pretty good, actually, because you're basically generating threat via your surges, and of course you get extra surges for being hidden. So strategic redeployment is really good. I'm gonna move this out of the way so I'm not having the mouse on everything. And then we have our 4 XP cards. You get hidden. It's an attachment and it gets hidden. You can deplete it once per. So basically, once per mission, you can get a free dodge. And you also have permanent hiddens on this figure. It's okay. The fact that this is an attachment and it's limit once per round on the dodge is like, you don't get you get that one use sometimes. That's okay. I think this other one is much better. where you can discard your beneficials to get another one. So you can turn all of your hidden conditions into focuses, which is pretty nuts. And then you can exhaust it to get Surge for Hide, which is whatever. But turning all your hiddens, and you can generate a lot of hiddens with this deck into hides or into focus, is super strong. So this one's hard to rate actually for me. I think if it's against melee and you have this stealth shadow armor combo, it's really strong. I think otherwise, until you get versatility and you can start getting a bunch of focuses, it's not great. Um, and even with versatility, like I guess you could combo a Shadow Core, and then as I pointed out, I've only played. I think I only played against this one like for half of campaign. And it was a long time ago. I'm gonna rate. I do think it's a good deck though. I think it's A against melee, and it's like B minus against most other things. Actually gonna put it. I'm gonna put it above precision training and below experimental armor or whatever that one was called. All right, moving on to the strongest expansion in the game, in my opinion, Jabba's Realm. And the class decks are no exception. I think Jabba's Realm has the strongest class decks, but let's take a look at them. We'll go over. Let's talk about Hut Mercenaries first. So, this one I should preface and say that this is the only class deck I have not actually played with or against, at least human opponents. But I can look at all the cards and I've seen people talk about it a lot. So I'll be going based on that, but I just wanted to make that known. But this deck's really cool because it has the bounty tokens, which are something that I really want to incorporate into ISCP cards somehow. I just think we just haven't figured out how to do that yet, or what we want to use that on yet. But look forward to that. I really want to try use bounty tokens in a design, and I'm sure as soon as one of our other steering committee members hears this, they're gonna preempt me and put up a bounty token design in our private chat. So, looking forward to seeing what that card is. Let's see. So, you give each hero bounty token. While you're attacking a hero with a bounty token, you can exhaust this starter card to apply +1 damage or +1 surge. And that's after dice are rolled, so that's really good because you can see if you need that surge for like a +2 trigger, or if you just want the +1 damage. And then whenever a hero with a bounty token is defeated, you discard that bounty token. So it forces you to kind of spread the damage around. And that carries over from mission to mission. So like if you defeat 3 heroes and then the mission ends, you'll only have one bounty token on the one hero starting in the next mission. So a really interesting mechanic. So going forward, when a bounty token is defending to reroll one attack die. It's always interesting the wording here because it says they have to mention the hero with the bounty token, so they have to say while defending, but it's a while attacking ability. An Imperial figure can spend 1 surge to ready this card, so that's pretty cool. Nice little reroll there for 1 XP. Scouted is attacking, so it's while they're attacking, while the rebels attacking, you get to reroll defense die, but you convert all dodges, so not great. But you do get to ignore the no scum figures. So actually, Scouted is kind of important because the rest of this class deck is very focused on like giving buffs to mercenary figures. So if you come across them, there are some missions in the campaign that are like no mercenary figures allowed. You get to ignore that, which is really nice. You don't get to ignore like no creatures allowed, which could be bad, but honestly, like if I'm bringing mercenary figures, it's going to be hired guns or it's going to be a Jawa, so I don't really mind that. So the Scouted might be actually pretty important, and the nice thing is you'll know which mission you're playing next, and as the Imperial player, you can like peek at the next mission. Actually, you should be doing that, and then you can choose if you need to bring this or not. So that's something you can keep in your back pocket, and it's smart that they made it cost 1 XP, so you could do that. Okay, Savage Motivation. Now we're going to get into the real busted stuff here. Sauce's card, choose an adjacent rebel figure, roll in yellow. So this is just free damage. It doesn't matter if they have a bounty token or not. And then you roll a blue die instead of yellow if you're using a mercenary figure. So this is very good. You don't have to deal with dodges. You don't have to deal with defense dice. It's just exhaust this card, roll a blue die, and they take damage. And usually a blue die is going to do 1 to 2 damage. Not good if you're using the yellow die, but don't do that. Cheap shot, choose an adjacent hostile figure. So this is the same thing. That figure may test strength if it does not pass points weaken. If the Imperial figure is, I'm going to apply -1 to the test results. I don't like this as much. I think it doesn't. So this deck is all about dealing damage, and so you want Savage Motivation. Cheap shot is not as useful. Weakened is, I mean, weakened is good, but it's not as good as dealing damage because it doesn't stack with other damage. Nowhere to hide. Exhaust cover for an attack targeting a hero with a bounty token is declared. Figures not blind of sight. Oh, and you add 1 blue die, so this is fantastic. Really good for 3 XP. Adding a die is great. It's going to add to all the other effects that are going to deal extra damage, and that's going to be a common theme here. We got nowhere to run. When you're attacking a hero who has suffered 3 or more strain, it's when the attack is declared, you apply +1 damage to attack results, so that's great. And you get an additional +1 if it's a mercenary figure attacking, so fantastic. Really strong. Guild Hunters, when you deploy a mercenary figure, that figure becomes hidden. This is a universal effect. This is not an attachment. And then Imperial figures gain. And by the way, Imperial figures means all of your figures. Imperial figures are all figures controlled by the Imperial player. And then if it's the little faction symbol determines if they're talking about like scum figures or actual Imperial figures. So you get extra surge abilities, which are really good. Surge plus 2 is great. Surge plus 1 is great. This is great. I mean, this with, again, hired guns, this is a force multiplier because they're hidden, they're rolling green, yellow, and then I'll have all these surge abilities to spend those extra surges on, and they can even rehide themselves. It's like literally impossible to over surge when you have this card. Really good with weak ways because they're rolling green, green. Trying to think if there's Jawas, amazing with Jawas. Obviously, they're rolling yellow, yellow, super cheap. Most wanted. Well, here's defending apply +2 damage destruction. It's ridiculous. That's any hero. It doesn't matter if they have a bounty token, but if they do have a bounty token, it's +1 damage, and that's wall defending. So it's after dice are rolled, you get to see if you need that or not. So basically, this is like Hunter trait from Skirmish deck. They just all the broken Hunter stuff that was in Jabba's realm in Skirmish. It's in this deck. This deck is insane from what I've heard, and it looks insane reading the cards. It's just a bunch of cards that add extra damage to your attacks or allow you to deal extra damage even without attacking. I have heard people say that they had a full 4 hero wound win on like the start of turn 3 with this deck or earlier. It just seems insane. So yeah, this is an S. I haven't even played it, and I can see this is an S tier deck. This is like military might on steroids. It's just so hyper focused on dealing so much extra damage so quickly that I think if you're the rebels playing against this, you are going to be hard pressed to keep the table clear of any Imperial figures and specifically scum figures if you want to win, or else you're just going to have your heroes get wounded like snap like that. All right. Moving on to the next class deck, the Nemesis deck. So this is actually one of my favorite class decks because it brings in villains, which is something that just wasn't really part of the campaign, unfortunately, that you could customize, that is. But this lets you do that. So this is really cool. You earn, again, here you see the faction symbol. You earn an Imperial or a mercenary villain of your choice. So this happens when you take this card, so at the start of the campaign. So for the rest of the campaign, you get to keep it. And then that's going to determine what bonuses you get based on the trait that it has. So if it's a force user, I mean, I guess there's no force user deployments, but brawler, leader, hunter, smuggler. Are there any unique creatures? I don't think so, but a lot of the different traits that they kind of act as a leader. So you actually get. Oh, I didn't even realize this. You get 2. So inspirational is the other one. And then also you get to deplete this card when you deploy a villain to reduce its deployment cost by the threat level. So by the way, this costs threat, but obviously it's reducing your threat costs. So this is fine. It balances out, and it's a deplete. So basically, it makes the villain you brought cheaper for that mission based on how far into the campaign you are, which is great. And then whenever you have a figure attacking, You get to choose a villain on the map or that's in your hand, so if you haven't deployed it yet, and if it shares a trait with the attacker, you get to add +1 surge, or if you're defending, +1 evade. So that's great. Okay, looking at the cards. Let's see. Exhausted Group instead of active group. Oh, this is interesting. Prepare the ambush is really interesting. It lets you pass basically against the rebels. This is something that doesn't come up a lot, but if you can set it up where um, you're like far away from the rebels and they don't want to come to you and you don't want to come to them because then whoever moves first will get shot at. This can be really useful for that. And then it gives you 2 free movement points to the first figure that activates. So this is actually pretty useful. I remember using this in one campaign and I thought this is really nice. Fearsome Presence, each for... oh, this is not that great. Just suffers strain. Um, Ringleader. Where is the card I'm looking for? Oh, Ringleader's really good. Gives you 2 extra movement points and gives all of your nearby figures, your adjacent figures to you +1 damage on attacking. Fantastic. Again, anything that is like +1 damage to all of your attacks is great, and you should pick it. You should take it highly. Um, it's a little harder with this one because you have to have the figure stay alive and they have to be adjacent. But if you can set it up where you're getting all of your attacks are getting +1 damage, you're gonna overwhelm the rebels pretty quickly if you have enough figures on the table. I'm the leader, or I'm on the leader. While figures attacking, the healthy hero suffered the least damage. Play +2. Oh yeah, this one. This is kind of similar to the idea of the other one. I don't like this card. You have to attack the highest health hero to get this, so you're forced to spread your damage in a way that is very ineffective because then they can just keep resting, like do rotating rests to heal that off. So I don't like this card at all. Leave them to me. Here we go. So you get to add another earned villain to your hand, and then it reduces the cost of a villain by 5. So this is a really good one. This is really important. If you pick like a more expensive villain, like something like Bosk or the Inquisitor that costs 9 in campaign, you want to bring this one, especially if you're going to bring something like Vader. I don't know. I mean, Vader becomes viable actually with this deck, which is really cool. But you really need to bring this. You got to prioritize this if you're going to bring something like Vader or Rogard Champion. Yeah, he's pretty expensive in vanilla campaign. um, Punishing Force. Imperial's attacking reroll any number of attack dice. That's not great. Oh, but you get to use it after each rebel activation. This one's not great either. Rerolls are just meh. You know, I mean, they're nice to have, but 3 XP is expensive for something that only gives you rerolls on attack. And then finally 4 XP with increased position defending and play -1. Oh, this is really good too. It's not honestly not as good as Ringleader because the rebels have more control over how this affects them. Because obviously, if you activate your villain, move it up to the rebels, then they'll just move away. This one, the rebels, unless they have something that pushes your figures around really far, they can't really disrupt this from being used. So actually, I don't like Devastating Legion as much. I think it's harder to use. But then we have Indomitable, which is, I think, the better card for XP you want to look at. Villains cannot receive harmful conditions. That's fantastic. So no stunning Vader, which is usually what makes him very ineffective. Exhausted card attack targeting a villain is declared to add 1 black die to the villain's defense pool. Fantastic. You're not going to be dealing any damage to Vader when he rolls 3 dice. And then you can spend 1 threat to ready this. So that's fine. It's totally optional. I think not being completely immune to harmful conditions is probably really good, but honestly, I would not prioritize any of these 4 XPs over stuff like Ringleader and leave them to me, and some of the other lower cost ones. So overall, I think this is a fantastic class deck. Really fun. I love that you get to bring the villains into the campaign, other than just what the story is feeding you. Um, as far as strength, I think it's actually. I don't think this is quite as good as Military Might because it's a little harder to use and less generic. But I do think it's actually better than. Um, oh my god, I'm forgetting the name. The Strain one. It's just you do have access to Ringleader for extra damage, and you get to use this sweet villain for really cheap. That can usually deal some damage. I think that's the other reason why it's not as good as Military Might. Villains are just still expensive. They are one figure that does usually one attack, unless you bring like a really expensive one. So with military might, you can kind of spread your effects around on any figures you have left over once the rebels are done trying to kill you. But with this one, if they take out, that's the other thing. If they take out your villain, he's gone. You can't redeploy villains after they die. So that's the other big problem. Is if you lose your villain leader, then a lot of your other effects are not going to be quite as useful. But I still think it's a great card and very strong. Um, Much stronger than some of these other ones. Actually, yeah. Now that I think about it, if you lose your villain, that does. I'm gonna actually move it down here. I think this is. I think it's not quite as good as experimental arms based on what I've been able to do with this deck, but it is better than these three. Okay, moving through it, we're getting there. The next one in. Let's see. Oh, so now we're moving on to Heart of the Empire. Heart of the Empire is pretty good. I think not quite as strong as Jabba's Realm, but I think it's one of the stronger ones aside from the core set. So first one we'll look at Power of the Dark Side. So actually I've only played against this one, but it's been pretty good, and I've also read a lot of players' experiences with this deck. So exhaust this card at the start of. Oh yeah, this is the one that gives you power tokens. Also, I love the naming scheme in this deck. It's really fun. So you get 3 damage power tokens for your starting card, which is really strong actually. It is possible to disrupt their usage, uh, but if you can lose your figures. It's not as good as like just an instant focus on demand. But usually you'll get to use at least 1 or 2 of those power tokens, and then those do add up. So those are nice. It's not a scaling like it's not a power what do you call it, force multiplier, but it is nice. And then Dark Resurgence. So this card I've heard is really good. I mean, it makes sense because Miracle Worker and Skirmish does pretty much the same thing, and then that card is like good enough to make a crappy figure like MHD really good in competitive play. So this keeps your figure alive and then recovers 3 damage from it. I think the theme on this one was like you want to use like strong, high cost figures with this deck, um, and that makes sense. It's like Power of the Dark Side. So yeah, if you have like a really expensive, if you have a more expensive figure, I think this is great with stuff like sentry droids. Anything that's hard to kill, like making it harder to kill, and so it can keep doing damage, is going to be really good. So this is really good for 1 XP. Even though it's only once per round, I think it's going to have a big impact on the game each time it triggers. And then we have Embrace Fear. At the start of the first Rebel activation, the activating figure may test Insight. If it does not succeed, it suffers 1 strain. By the way, it's a may because if you choose not to test, you fail. So, but that kind of sucks because it means that if they're focused, they can just take 1 strain and not lose their focus, which is the whole point of these like make them test an attribute cards. And then you can exhaust at the start of Imperial activation. That figure gains 1 move point. This is fine. I mean, 1 movement point on one figure for 1 XP is not great, and it only triggers once for the strain. So not as good. Definitely not as good as Dark Resurgence. Supernatural Vigor. You just want to improve if it gains +3 health. Well, that's really good with Dark Resurgence for sure. And then, and again, it's 1 Imperial figure. So the whole day is you're buffing this one crazy strong figure. Brace Anger. When an Imperial figure declares an attack, that figure suffers damage, then 1 damage, then apply +1. That's fine. And then you ready the card at the end of each Imperial group activation. So not a good force multiplier again because you only get it once per group. But it's pretty good for 2 XP. Like +1 damage per group. I feel like they figured out that having cards that just do +1 damage to all attacks is really broken, and this was their way to fix that, so that's fine. It's like fair. Embrace hate. Sorry, it says hats in here. Embrace hate. At the start of each status phase, choose a rebel figure. The chosen figure suffers 1 strain. That's good. Then, if the chosen figure is in line of sight of an Imperial figure, that Imperial figure also suffers 1 damage and gains 1 damage power token. It's not much for 3 XP. I would not go for that one. And natural abilities. Oh, this is one of the stronger ones. It's attachment. You can't put it on a creature, so no Nexu, which makes sense because it gives you +1 evade, which would be great on the Nexu with cunning. +1 block also if your starting group size is 1. So I'm trying to think what you would put this on. Mostly villains. Death Trooper would be pretty good with this. The Elite Death Trooper. There's not a whole lot of good like non-unique single figure groups. You could put it on a vehicle though. I think that's what we did. That's what happened to me in my campaign. Is my Imperial player put it on an ATDP and it was insane. ATDP with +1 evade, +1 block, and then it gains a damage power token at the end of its activation. That was really good. Embrace suffering. Here we go. 4 XP. End of round. Choose a figure, rebel figure. Push that figure up to 2 spaces. That's actually pretty good. 2 threat. Exhaust the card at the end of round and choose a rebel figure for an attack with that figure. That's actually possibly worth 2 threat. Because the thing is, when you attack with a hostile figure, you control that figure for that attack, so you get to use all of its abilities, and that means you can take strain for certain things. You use its focus up if it's focused. So this one actually is pretty good, and I would consider um, planning my threat gain around this card. The only problem is if the rebels play around it, then they'll make sure there's nothing for you to attack with at the end of the round, or only a bad figure to attack with. So actually, maybe not so high on this card. Pushing a figure 2 spaces is good though. That can be very disruptive. Power of passing. Really? Is that what it's called? Power of passion. Oh my god, guys, I'm so sorry. Power of passion. Power of passing is very important in skirmish, but this one's the power of passion. When an Imperial figure spends a damage power token, apply +1 surge to attack results. So that's in addition to the +1 damage, and exhaust this card while Imperial figure is attacking to reroll any number of attack dice. Yeah, this is good. I don't know if it's 4 XP good, because they can always target your figures that have damage power tokens on them to make sure they don't get to attack. It's not like a carte blanche. So this one's good. I think it's a little more niche, for sure, but like unnatural abilities can be really strong if you put it on the right figure. So can some of these other abilities that deal extra damage. I remember it being strong, but not being too bad. I think I would have to put this one below Experimental Arms, but above Nemesis. I think it is better than Nemesis slightly, but I think Experimental Arms is more flexible in what it can do and what figures it can use. So that's going to be my ranking there. All right, next one, 2 more to go. Next one is reactive defenses. I did play this in a campaign, and this is actually a really fun one. You start off with 88Z, and let's see, did they put it in here? No, they didn't. So at the start of the mission, deploy 88Z. Exhaust this card during optional deployment to deploy 88Z, so you can always bring it back each round, and then activate the start or end of an Imperial activation. Let's see if I can pull it up here. Companions. Here he is. So 88Z, if you can see it on your screen. Yeah, there he is. So he's a companion. He has 4 health. He has +1 dodge. This is super important. He's very difficult to get rid of. They can kill him with stuff like blast, or if they have a weapon that has -1 dodge. But he also has Pierce 1, and he rolls a red or yellow die on range, and he gets +2 accuracy. He's also mobile, which is great, although he's only speed 3. And he has Surge for harass, just like the Jawa. He does, if the attack doesn't miss, the target suffers 1 strain, so that's really nice. And then remote is interesting. It means you're not an Imperial figure for mission rules, so that means you can't cheese certain rules where, like, the rebels can't win until there are no Imperial figures in a certain room, which would be broken because he has the +1 dodge. So a lot of times, certain rebel comps can't even damage him. So that's what that ability is for, is so that certain missions don't break because of this figure. But going back to the actual cards, so that means you get this little droid running around doing like random bits of damage. It's actually decent, actually, if you can do like 1 to 2 damage with his attack just to start. It's about the equivalent to like a focus, but even better because you can split it up where you need it. So I think he's actually pretty good. But let's get into what he can do. So the whole deck is focused around 88Z. So he gets special action. This is 1 XP. Place an energy shield in an adjacent space, and a reminder: energy shields block line of sight, but they don't block movement. They're like a token. It takes up 1 space. A figure can attack these energy shields. They have health 5 and defense 1 block. Exhaust this card when an attack targeting an Imperial figure is declared to apply +1 block to the defense result. So a lot of them give 88Z an ability, and then they give the rest of the figures in the army an ability, which is really good. I think energy shields are okay. They're pretty good if you can use them in a way where you can stop the rebels from getting to attack your figures twice. Like if they have to move to get line of sight around these energy shields to get to your figures, can actually be really strong. The only problem with that is usually in campaign, all the Imperial figures start like all spread out in different places, so you can't. It's really hard to leverage the energy shield there until later. But I think shielded's pretty good. Um, Blaster emplacement at the end of each round, choose roll a figure, then roll 1 yellow die. That figure suffers damage equals damage results. That's fine. Exhaust card when Imperial figure declares attack, apply +2 extra results. I remember not using this, not wanting to use this card. It's just too, like, I think there's 2 results on the yellow die that has 0 damage, so I really would not want to have this just do nothing. I think this is a possible do nothing. Yeah, I don't want you want that one. Remote activation. I think this one was good. Special action. So it's an attachment. It goes on any of your Imperial figures. 88Z may interrupt to perform a move, attack, or special action limit once per group per activation. Then exhaust this card during activation for 88Z to gain 2 movement points. This is actually really good to get later because there's a bunch of more expensive abilities where you need 88Z to be in a certain position to support certain figures, and then you can use this to like reposition as needed. And same thing with the special action. If you need 88Z to get to a certain spot, this is really good to do that. Mechanical protocol. 88Z gains special action move up to 2 other figures within 2 spaces of each gain 1 surge token. So that's pretty good. It's also this card while a droid, including 88Z, is attacking to apply +1 damage to attack results. This one's pretty good too. I think this is fine. Up to like 3 extra damage per round with this, because 88Z. The nice thing is 88Z can activate first, give 2 tokens to 2 figures, and then those 2 figures can immediately activate and attack and get to use those tokens, which is a big difference from the last deck we looked at, where there's a delay on the power tokens and the rebels can counter by killing those figures. So that's really good. And then +1 damage on mostly on 88Z's attacks is fine. Electromagnetic disruptors. When a rebel figure within 3 spaces of 88Z is attacking, apply -1 accuracy results. That's nothing. Exhaust this card after 88Z activates. Distribute 2 block or evade power tokens among figures within 3 spaces. Figure can gain a block token only if it rolls a white die, or an evade token only if it rolls a black die. This one's not great. I wouldn't prioritize this because there's better cards later on that we're going to look at. Alright, infrared scanners. 88Z gains special action. Choose a hero in your line of sight. That hero may suffer 1 strain to test insight. If it does not succeed, increase threat by 1. No, I don't like that card. Like I said, again, I plan my threat around the threat level, and I don't want something that's going to just randomly give me threat that I've not planned on how to use. And again, they can choose whether they want to do that or not. So you can't even force them to like spend their focus. But at the start of each Imperial figure's activation, that figure gains 1 movement point. That's pretty good. Not great though. I don't like that card. Here we go. Now we're getting into the 2 really good cards. I would take both of these for XP cards. Overclock. You can exhaust this card to ready 88Z. Great. You get an extra activation. 88Z gains a special action to gain 1 damage power token. Also great. Means that usually what you'll end up doing is you'll have 88Z in a good position. You'll use a special action to get a damage power token. Then you'll attack something with +1 damage from the token, and usually maybe +1 damage from mechanical protocol. And then you'll ready him and do it again. And then 88Z can perform 3 actions each activation. So yeah, you'll move, gain a power token, attack, move, gain a power token, attack. Or you can use these other abilities that are on these other cards. And then finally, targeting sensors. When another Imperial figure within 2 spaces of 88Z declares an attack, apply +1 damage and +1 accuracy to the attack results. So there we go. That's the kind of cards I'm looking for as an Imperial player. Stuff that can give all of my attacks +1 damage. That's going to give me a huge force multiplier when I flood the board with a bunch of 2-point figures. And then just start plinking away at the rebels and dealing a ton of extra damage. And exhaust this card while Imperial figure is attacking, apply +1 damage to attack results, so you get to even add more damage, and it's while while attacking. So you get to see the dice results, so that means you get to perfectly control how your damage is being used to make sure you get the wound on those rebels when you need it, instead of leaving them at 1 health. So targeting sensors was really good for me when I used it. Overclock was also really good. I think the other ones I took were Mechanical Protocol as well, which is really good with targeting sensors. Makes your droids just like gives them a free assassinate whenever you need it. So this deck was actually really good. I also think this deck was underrated by a lot of people, just not realizing how good it was, or didn't like how it played in the early game. It is a little clunky in the early game, but I'm gonna give this. I don't think it's quite as good as Military Might, but I think you can set it up where it's going to be much better than this. So I actually have this rated. I'm surprised. I didn't think I was going to rate this highly, but I did like this deck a lot when I played it, when I had these combos set up. All the cards do a lot of stuff too. Like, you have so much abilities to play with in this deck. I think each card does like 2 or 3 things. That's really powerful. It gives you a lot of options. Okay, finally, we're gonna go into the final expansion, which was Tyrants of Lothal. I did play this deck. I actually played this deck for only a few missions, and I decided I did not like it, and I stopped. I asked my players, "Hey, is it okay if I switch to a different deck?" Because I did not like this deck. So, spoiler. So this is a power token based deck, but it's also based on like doing stuff to your deployment cards that are in your hand, that are in reserve. So let's look at what it does. You play with your deployment cards face up. Man, that is just such a not good thing. Like, this is all your deployment cards. I believe this includes your reserved deployment cards. I might be wrong, but even if it's just your open groups, that sucks, because part of the advantage of being the Imperial player is you get to set up these traps and things ahead of time that your rebels don't get to know about, and then also you get to like set up these cool moments where like this giant vehicle appears out of nowhere that they didn't think was going to be there, or like a bunch of wampas appear that, or Nexus or whatever. Weird stuff that's like, whoa, you didn't expect that to happen, and you're like, yeah, haha, now you face my whatever pet or my huge vehicle, and you don't get to do that with this whole deck because this is in your starting hand. Okay, rant over. Moving on. At the start of each round, distribute 1 damage power token and 1 block token among cards in your hand. So you put them on the cards in your hand, and then when you deploy a group from your hand, you distribute the tokens on its card among its figures. So you're building up 2 power tokens a turn on cards in your hand, and then you get to put them on the figures. Um, my experience playing this deck was I just had power tokens piling up on the cards in my hand, and then I would finally deploy them, and I would have like 4 or 6 power tokens are on this card, but it only had 2 figures or even 1 figure in it, and I had to discard all of them except for 2. So that's why. Personal flagship. You earn 1 villain of your choice, so that's great. After choosing open groups, add 1 earned villain to your hand of open groups. That's also great. When you activate a villain, a friendly figure within 3 spaces of that villain gains 1 damage power token or 1 block token. So that's pretty good. I like this card. I remember taking that card pretty early. Redouble our effort at the start of each round. You place 1 damage power token or 1 block token on a card in your hand. Again, a lot of these cards do what this card does, which is just adding power tokens to cards in your hand, so they start to pile up really quickly, and then you end up with these huge piles of power tokens that you can't really make use of because they're stuck in your hand, or they get discarded when you deploy your group, and you can only have 2 power tokens on each figure. Exhaust this card when Imperial figure is defeated. Distribute that figure's power tokens among other friendly figures within 3 spaces. Why didn't they just make it like when you deploy a group and it has extra power tokens, you should have been able to distribute it. That would have made it so much better. So that was a whiff. Implacable, at the start of each round, place 1 evade power token on a card in your hand. Yep, there we go again. Exhaust this card while an Imperial figure is defending. That figure may spend a block or evade power token from friendly figures within their spaces as if they were its own. That's really good. Actually, we know that from trying out similar abilities in skirmish, that being able to spend other figures' power tokens, especially on defense, is really good. We also know that from X-Wing with the what are those things called? The Vulture droids in X-Wing 2.0. They have a very similar ability, and it makes them really, really strong. Thailanders, exhaust this card after you deploy a figure. Choose up to 3 rebel figures within 5 spaces of the deployed figure. Each of those figures suffers 1 damage, plus an additional 1 damage if the figure has 2 activation tokens. This is fine. It deals like 1 to 4 damage per turn for 2 XP, depending on the situation, but usually it's going to be like 2 damage. So that's, yeah, meh. At the start of each round, place 1 surge token on a card in your hand. There you go. Exhaust this card when an Imperial figure spends a surge token. During this attack, that figure may use 1 surge ability on another Imperial figure within 3 spaces. That's pretty good. That second part, I hate that it just piles up more power tokens that you can't use. Exhaust this card during one of your activations to choose a hero. That hero may test Insight. Again, may test. If the hero succeeds, they suffer 1 strain. Otherwise, the hero suffers 3 damage. Sounds pretty good. And then our 4 XP cards. At the start of each round, place 1 wild power token on a card in your hand so that you choose one and then you place that type on a card in your hand. Exhaust this card during one of your activations. Remove 2 power tokens from deployment cards in your hand. Distribute those tokens among friendly figures. So this one is actually like mitigates the problem with this class deck, but it's 4 XP, so it's like instead of making your card stronger, it's really just getting around the drawback that you have to deal with this deck. And then Limitless Arsenal, exhaust this card when an Imperial figure declares an attack. You may place that figure's attack pool with the attack pool of a deployment card in your hand with at least 1 damage or surge token. This card is broken. I remember when I got to it, I chose this card, and then I just kept my cool giant vehicle figure in my hand the whole time. It made me not want to deploy it, which is the whole fun of bringing those figures. You're incentivized to just keep it in your hand. I realized that it's supposed to be like, hey, bring this car, this vehicle or whatever. Even if you can't deploy it for a while, we'll let you use the attack on it. But why would I deploy it when I can just keep it in my hand, not spend a bunch of threat, and just have a bunch of my like little puny stormtroopers perform that 3 dice attack? Yeah, I did not enjoy playing this deck, and I think it's not very strong either. I think the problem is, again, you can only have 2 power tokens on each figure, so you're piling up these power tokens. I remember literally having like 4 to 6 power tokens on each card in my hand, like by turn 3 on the 3rd mission, and just every time I would deploy something, I would be so frustrated because like half of the tokens on the deployment card would just go in the discard pile or the game box, unusable. So this was very frustrating. I do feel like they did not test this class deck very well, which is a general thought or thing that I've heard about this expansion, was that it just wasn't play tested very much before release. This is the expansion that brought us Spectre Cell. So yeah, I'm going to give this one a D, if you couldn't tell by my long rant throughout that whole class deck. So there we go. Those are my final rankings. You can see a lot of B's, and then a few A's and an S, and a couple of C's and D's. Let me know what you guys think. This was really interesting to rank these, and kind of fun to go back down my campaign memory lane, thinking about what these cards did and how I saw them used in my campaigns. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys later.